In January 1914, a ship was crushed by Arctic ice and sank beneath the frozen sea. All 25 people on board made it off alive. Then the real nightmare began. Over the next 8 months, stranded on a desolate Arctic island with dwindling food, no rescue coming, and no way to call for help, they started dying, one by one. From starvation, from disease, from a gunshot wound nobody could explain. But this is not just a story of disaster. It's a story of one man who refused to let everyone die. A captain who walked 700 miles across Arctic ice, alone, to find help for people he didn't have to save. 11 people died before it was over. 14 survived. And none of them should have made it at all. June 1913. The Canadian government launches one of its most ambitious scientific expeditions, a survey of Canada's northern Arctic coast. The flagship vessel is the Karluk, a 129-foot wooden brigantine, originally built as a whaler, retrofitted for Arctic conditions. The man asked to captain it is Robert Bartlett, an experienced Newfoundland-born polar explorer who had previously sailed with Robert Peary on his 1909 expedition toward the North Pole. Bartlett knew Arctic waters, and from the moment he saw the Karluk, he was uneasy. The ship was old. The hull was wooden. It was underpowered and not built to withstand serious ice pressure. Bartlett agreed to captain it only under the assumption they would not be wintering in Arctic waters. That assumption would prove fatally wrong. The expedition leader was Vilhjalmur Stephenson, a charismatic Canadian anthropologist and Arctic enthusiast who had made his name living among the Inuit. He assembled a crew of 25, scientists, sailors, hunters, and an Inuit family, a man named Karluk, his wife Karluk, and their 2 young daughters, Helen and Mugpi. Mugpi was 3 years old. On August 13, 1913, the Karluk became trapped in pack ice near Point Barrow, Alaska. The plan was to wait for the ice to release them. It never did. What happened next is one of the most controversial moments in Arctic exploration history. On September 20th, Stephenson, the expedition leader, the man responsible for everyone on board, announced he was leaving the ship with 5 companions to hunt caribou on the nearby coast. He said he would be back in 10 days. 2 days after the party departed, a blizzard pushed the Karluk westward toward Siberia. The ice that held the ship began moving, and it didn't stop. Stephenson never came back. He reached land and devoted himself to the expedition's scientific objectives, leaving the crew and staff on board to their own devices under Captain Bartlett. To this day, historians debate whether he deliberately abandoned them or genuinely believed they would be fine. Either way, 25 people were now drifting helplessly toward Siberia on a ship that was never built for what was happening to it. They drifted for months. Christmas came and went on the ice, New Year's too. Then, on January 11th, 1914, the ice tightened its grip. The Karluk was crushed and sank, leaving all 25 crew members and expedition staff alive on the ice. Bartlett had seen it coming. He had already organized the offloading of supplies, food, and equipment onto the ice before the ship went down. His foresight saved everyone, for now. They were stranded on the Arctic ice, hundreds of miles from land in January, in the dark, in temperatures that could kill an exposed person in minutes. Bartlett set up a camp on the ice and began organizing the march toward Wrangel Island, a desolate, uninhabited Russian island roughly 80 miles away. It was their only option. He sent out 4 scouts ahead. They disappeared, never found. The remaining group pressed on. It took 6 weeks to walk 128 kilometers to Wrangel Island, on drifting, shifting, treacherous sea ice in Arctic winter, with a 3-year-old child. They made it to Wrangel Island on March 12, 1914. Then Bartlett made a decision that defined the entire disaster. Someone had to go for help. Wrangel Island was uninhabited and unvisited. No rescue was coming. Nobody even knew exactly where they were. Bartlett decided to go himself, accompanied by Kataktovik, one of the Inuit hunters. The pair left on March 18th, traveling over the sea ice toward mainland Siberia. What followed was an extraordinary solo journey. Bartlett and Kataktovik completed a perilous 700-mile journey to the Bering Strait, where they searched for a vessel to save their stranded crewmates. Over ice, across Siberia to a Russian port, then by ship to Alaska, where Bartlett finally radioed news of the disaster to the Canadian government. Back on Wrangel Island, the survivors waited, and while they waited, things fell apart. Food ran critically low. The men hunted birds and collected eggs, barely enough to survive. Tensions rose. Arguments broke out over rations, tobacco, ammunition. In May, 2 men died of a strange illness later diagnosed as nephritis, kidney failure brought on by improperly prepared dried meat. Then, in June, things got darker. A man was found dead in his tent from a gunshot wound. Whether it was suicide, accident, or murder was never determined. No investigation was possible. They buried him and kept surviving. Rescue attempts failed repeatedly. Ships couldn't get through the ice. Months passed with no sign of help. The survivors on Wrangel Island had no way of knowing whether Bartlett had even made it, whether anyone was coming at all. Finally, on September 7, 1914, 6 months after Bartlett had left, a rescue ship reached Wrangel Island. 14 survivors were taken off the island. They reached Nome, Alaska on September 13th, just over a year since the expedition had first set sail. 11 people had died. The last survivor of the entire Karluk voyage was Mugpi, the 3-year-old girl who had endured the ice march and the months on Wrangel Island. She later became known as Ruth Makpi Ipaluk. She died in 2008 at age 97. The Karluk disaster is remembered today as one of the most extraordinary survival stories in Arctic history, and one of the most damning examples of leadership failure. Stephenson went on to write books and give lectures. He was celebrated in some circles as a great explorer. Others never forgave him for walking off that ship. Bartlett was never given the full recognition many believed he deserved. The man who organized the survival on the ice, who walked 700 miles to save people he could have abandoned, he went back to sea and kept sailing until his death in 1946. The Karluk itself rests somewhere on the floor of the Chukchi Sea. Its exact location has never been confirmed. 25 people got off that ship alive. 11 never made it home, and a 3-year-old girl outlasted all of them.